Hello. Before she became an author, an international teacher of intuitive intelligence, and founder of Intuition Lab, Kim Chestney was a curious teenager who stole a copy of Shirley MacLaine's book out on a limb off her mother's bookshelf when she was quite young and opened a door that she has never closed since. That single book lit a fire, a quest to understand the unexplainable, to decode the magic of the intuitive mind, and to discover how we can access a reality that doesn't play by the rules of logic. Since then, Kim's followed the thread across continents and disciplines, from quantum physics and mysticism to near-death experiences, interdimensional awareness, and the art of knowing without knowing how. Her books, Radical Intuition, The Psychic Workshop, and The Illumination Code invite us to see intuition not as a fringe faculty, but as our most essential intelligence. And today, she's sharing the 10 books that lit her path, shaped her worldview, and helped her remember who she really is. Kim Chestney, welcome.
Thanks for having me here, Sandy. It's so great to be talking about all this wonderful stuff my favorite topics in the world.
So tell me about your process of having to distill the 10 books, or your whole list of books down to 10. Did you go back in time and reflect on what each one did for you at the time?
Yeah, actually, it ended up kind of being this sort of outline, a framework for my whole journey of awakening. And I didn't really expect that to happen. You have these wonderful books that move your soul and light a fire for your passion of spiritual development. But I really was able to trace it back to, wow, there are books that have been side by side with every step of my awakening, and in very different ways, right? Not just the sort of traditional path. So yeah, it was a really cool way to look back and like see my life in reverse from the inside out a little bit.
Some people describe it as having a life review without having to leave the planet.
I get it. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So why wasn't Shirley's book on your list?
Well, that's a great question. I think that because I was so young, and I could have put it on the list just because it was the door opener. It was the gateway, right? It was that book that called me to step through and to see that there was more to life than, what everybody, even as a kid, I recognized it was more than what, people were saying or willing to talk about. Especially in my household, I was, very grounded, no nonsense upbringing. So all of my Halloween baby Scorpio interests were not something that people took seriously. So I think it really just validated for me, Shirley's book, that there is a quest out there and a pathway out there. And she kind of became a role model for me. But in terms of the actual, the things that actually made these shifts in my life, that's what I tried to narrow the 10 down as to, the books that the content really showed me a shift in my reality. So that's kind of how this list came up.
I just want to ask you a question about being born on Halloween. Do you regard that as a really special day to have been born?
I do. And it's the funny stuff. I was even born at 12/12 on Halloween, and I was 6 planets in Scorpio. So I have this really sort of extraordinary birth chart, and I thought, wow, it's like, did my soul create this birth chart? Because you couldn't have created one more designed to do the work that I'm doing, because it really just sort of laser honed my attention on intuition and the nether worlds, the world beyond, the realms between realms is always something since I was a little kid I was just wired for. I talk a lot about, I grew up in a haunted house. I had all kind of spiritual stuff happening around me from a really, really young age. Aside from the fact that it was always fun having Halloween parties, there was a very deep element to that actually really shaped my character.
Interesting, isn't it? My granddaughter was born on Halloween. She's only 18, so we don't yet know, which direction she's going to take in life. But I'm going to tell her about yours.
I love it. Fellow Halloweeny.
Yeah. So let's talk about book number one, which this author comes up time and time again, but not so much this book. It is The Journey to Self-Realization, Collected Talks and Essays on Realizing God in Daily Life by Paramahansa Yogananda. The book was actually collected and written by an editor, but I haven't had this particular book come up before. What made you choose this one? How did you find it?
Well, it is by far my favorite Yogananda book. I think again, this was another one of those situations where I really fell in love with Yogananda, not really even knowing who he was. There's actually an interesting story about it. When I was in my intuitive development classes, as a young person, actually with someone else who's on this list later on, Ralph Jordan, he was a medium here in Pittsburgh who really did a lot of extraordinary work. And I had the pleasure of being able to train with this group of people here locally in person and back in that day, which was kind of hard to find if you weren't living in some of the big cities, bigger cities. So I was with Ralph, and he said to me one day, I think it was like the last time I ever saw him, he said, part of your work is to bring together the East and the West, and you need to read Paramahansa Yogananda. I had never heard of him. This was just an all new thing. And so I went and of course started with Autobiography of the Yogi, which is the most popular one that we hear about. And I instantly fell in love with his work because, intuition had always been something since as long as I can remember. I've been on this crusade to help normalize intuition and have people understand that it's part of everyday life. And part of this was even my own redemption process because all of this was such a part of my life. And I really needed to find a way to understand my world and realize that I live in a normal world just like everybody else. And there's nothing, strange about these occurrences that are happening to me. It's just, and now that we have the internet, we realize there's so many people that have these kind of experiences. But back then, it was very isolating. It was very hard to find other people who could really relate to these things. And Yogananda he was the first person that had a perspective on intuition that was very grounded, that wasn't so far in the woo-woo or the psychic realm that people wouldn't take it seriously. He came from this obviously Eastern tradition and understood intuition as the complement to the intellect, as our connection to our divine creator and that part of ourself that's higher than this world. So it had this, intuition through his eyes, began to take on this role of as sort of the supreme form of knowledge, something that is not something to be disparaged or to be called weird or to be called occult, but that was actually higher than the intellect. So for me, that was the first time I had really heard that theory. And so, I just devoured pretty much every book that I could get my hands on. I think I've probably read everything he's ever written, except I'm still working on the second coming of Christ, which is an excellent book. It's just 2,000 pages long. So I'm still working on that one. But it really, really is the foundation of the work that I do and that I teach, really came back to Yogananda. And that's why I had to put him first, even though he kind of came in at a later date. All of his work for me, I wouldn't be here without the work that he did or without the pathway that he blazed for a scientific understanding of intuition. It was all very scientific. He was way ahead of his time talking about quantum physics, talking about intuition and quantum physics back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, when this was all new. So it really, I feel like that book is the best book because it talks about that journey that all of us are on. Right? The Autobiography of a Yogi is great because it's his journey and we can understand, how he was made and how these ideas came out. But the journey to self-realization is the journey that every single one of us is taking. And it's all powerfully based on intuition and why it's really the key to understanding who we really are.
Yeah, what a trailblazer he was.
Indeed.
So book number 2, The Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra, published in 1975. And you said that for an entire summer, as a 19-year-old traveling through Europe, this book was attached to your hip.
Yeah, I was in college and I was actually studying to have a minor in physics in college. Even though I'm an artsy person and writing, I was doing all the creative stuff. I've always had this curiosity about physics. And this book really just, I couldn't like devour it enough. Like I loved every word of it. So it was one of those books that it was like by the time I got back from Europe, it was so tattered up and pages were falling out and dog-eared and written all through it. I saved it for like years and years and years as sort of like this treasure of my spiritual awakening. Really, again, getting back to the same idea, merging of East and West, and this idea of physics and science being integrally involved with intuition. Like in my mind, intuition is a quantum function. So we haven't gotten to that idea until very recently. So these were the real seeds that were being planted within me to understand intuition and how it actually worked from a quantum perspective. So I think that book was, culturally significant, but also personally significant for my journey in bringing together the intuitive realm with science. And yes, they can complement each other and work together, right?
Yeah, they can. Absolutely. Book number 3, I was interested to see this particular book on your list because it is Parker's Astrology, The Definitive Guide to Using Astrology in Every Aspect of Your Life by Julia and Derek Parker, published in 1991. But one of their books, The Complete Astrologer, was the book that started me on my path to
Yay.
study astrology. And I was given that particular book back in 1976. So it's nice to see them in the book club. Tell me how you came across this book.
Well, funny, I was actually living in the UK at the time, and I was living in Hull, and I was going to school up there at university, and I had made a friend there who was a fellow Scorpio, Leo rising, just like me, very strange that and she's like, you need to understand astrology. We have the same birth chart, and she went and did my birth chart for me, and it just blew my mind. I was like 19, 20 years old at the time. Blew my mind. I was like, this is so me. Like, how is it possible? Oh, is this why I do all these things? And so immediately fell in love with astrology and, began to integrate that into my worldview. But the book that she gave me and the chart that she used was all from Parker's Astrology. So that book really became my Bible. I just, again, like a staple for 10 years of my life until things became digital and I didn't have to use the paper ephemeris anymore. That book really helped me to understand that life was meaningful. And I think you probably can understand that too. Anybody who really, the first time they start to see that astrology has patterns that are undeniable and gives people like psychological understanding that there's no way to get in any other way. And it's one of the most ancient learning systems that we have. So when you really look at the big picture of astrology, and again, take off that cynical hat that's like, oh, it's woo woo or whatever. No, it's actually something that is really powerful and shows us the meaningful nature of life, that things aren't an accident. We're here. And in some way, it's like the code or the programming that's running this world. And there's so many secrets to discover with it. But for me, those moments that I had real astrological discoveries about my life, like I would go back and I would look at different dates and I'd see the alignments. I was like, how is this possible? And I those moments actually were real catalysts of some of my spiritual awakening. It really created some shifts that allowed me to experience some extraordinary things. So it's funny how books can actually not just in a simple way, like reading it can teach you new things. It can actually shift your vibration. So that you have these real like powerful experiences. And that happened to me multiple times with the astrology that they taught. So that's why they're on the list.
I was gifted that book for my birthday and I started studying it to disprove it. And I couldn't. Mine was the first chart I did, and it laid out everything that was happening to me, and they were not normal circumstances at that time. So that was it. I couldn't disprove it, and it's and back in those days, of course, we had to do it all by hand.
Yes, it was not an easy task.
No, it was not. It was quite an in-depth, long, arduous task. Yeah. So book number 4, The Business of Heaven, Daily Readings from C.S. Lewis by Walter Hooper, published in 1984.
Well, you'll start to see that a shift happen at this point. There's a lot more religious texts that are going to come in for a little while. So after I read all these books and I started to have some of my own personal awakenings, actually the Parker's astrology, the shift that I got from Parker's astrology, the night that I was working on some of my charts, I had an out-of-body experience after reading it. And that changed my energy, my view on life. It was just a sea change in my reality, and allowed me. I started to be able to see things like actually just things in the multidimensional realm that I couldn't see before with my senses. Like there was this whole huge shift, and I started to think maybe I was going crazy because see, that's what a real awakening looks like. You know, you're in here, you're like, like I didn't get all this. This wasn't supposed to happen. You know, all these psychic abilities started to wake up within me. And one of the things that I always loved about Yogananda too, is he talked about psychic ability being a byproduct of our spiritual evolution. And as we grow and evolve, we get more of these intuitive connections and abilities to do things. And so this started happening to me as a young person in my 20s. And it was that thing where I didn't know if it was really wonderful and extraordinary or if, you know, it was scary and I didn't understand what was happening to me. So I really turned to, I turned to psychology. I turned to anything I could read to help me understand the spiritual realm, which I didn't understand that much at that time because I didn't really have a background in any of that. I wasn't looking for any of that. It just kind of happened. And I ended up converting to Catholicism during that time. And the reason I did that was because I found that you know, the Catholic Church and the traditional church was one of the few traditions that actually acknowledged the spiritual realm, the angelic world. You know, my family grew up Protestant. It was like seeing is believing kind of thing. So I found C.S. Lewis, long story short, and he, again, was, to me, just his book Mere Christianity was just, again, a life-changing book that helped you to see, you know, really the tradition of Christianity, not in all of the negative contexts that I had received, you know, from social influences growing up. And I really saw, you know, that whole realm of the world and religion and spirituality in a different way, thanks to his really grounded approach to it. And so I picked The Business of Heaven as the book because, again, I love all his books. I loved The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as a little kid. As a Halloweenie, the witch spoke to me, and his work really, really resonated with me. Again, A Grief Observed, the best book I think ever written on loss and grief. If you've ever lost someone who you love, just he's such a heartfelt, soulful, intuitive writer. But The Business of Heaven is a day-to-day, every day a little piece of inspiration from C.S. Lewis. So again, that's one of those dog-eared books that are missing chunks of pages because I've just read it year after year for inspiration, but all around great vibes.
Yeah. Book number 5, The Interior Castle by St. Teresa of Avila, published in 1577. Yeah,
and that was just more of, you know, going down the mysticism route, and I fell in love with her work. As The Interior Castle is all about intuition. I realized, you know, it was one of those things that communing with God, the rapture of the divine, all of the words she was using were things that I could relate to with things that I had experienced during my awakening. So things finally started to make sense. Other people have witnessed this. I was just so excited to find her work, and I felt really seen by reading it. That again, because it was a different time. You know, remember, that wasn't an internet at that point. You couldn't connect with people, and it was a very isolating experience to be having this stuff. So she was a real consolation to me and this work. So yeah, I really recommend Saint Teresa to, you know, anybody who's coming from a more religious background who wants to understand what intuition is capable of.
Book number 6, Discovering the Natural Laws That Govern the Universe by your teacher, Ralph Jordan, published in 2001.
Yes, exactly. And I put that book on there. You might not have heard of it. It wasn't a bestseller, but for me, it really helped me to understand the invisible worlds. And like as I said, growing up in a haunted house and having a lot of physical manifestation of psychic phenomena around me very regularly in my life, he really helped me to not be afraid of it and step into my power and recognize that these were actually good things that were a reflection of my own inner power, and not like I was not the victim of something that was there to scare me, but was really a sign of a way to take control of my life and my intuitive abilities. So that was a really important book for me, and really helped me to embrace, who I was, and like not be apologizing for it anymore.
Book number 7 is a book that comes up again and again. It's actually in our top 10 list of most recommended books over the last 5 years. And everybody will understand why when I mention the title, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, published in 1997.
Yeah, what list would be complete without that? And for me, it was really important to me because all of the mindfulness that he talked about, everything in that book really opened up space for intuition. And that's why for me it was so important for people. I always tell people before they come and do work with intuition with me to go read that book, because you really can't listen to your intuition fully until you're in that state of presence and mindfulness and openness. So I always say we're moving, add a little insightfulness to our mindfulness. And that's when, we get these brilliant ideas and these downloads and these higher perspectives that they come through that space between your thoughts. So his work was, I think, really revolutionary in paving the way for people to start really working with their intuition.
Mm-hmm. Book number 8, A Whole New Mind, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future by Dan Pink, published in 2005. And I think he's right.
Yeah, right. And this was me putting on my, my work hat. I had a 20-year career in technology and arts and innovation. And his book was this moment when I realized that intuition was such a key part of all of that, and leadership and entrepreneurship and everything in the business world as well. So that was a real shift for me, recognizing that intuition just wasn't this spiritual thing. It was infused in everything we do, particularly creativity and the arts and all of that right brain stuff. So that book's a great merging of psychology and intuition in a very grounded way.
I remember many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, reading a book. Somebody was interviewing some of the top CEOs in the world and asking them, how they made their decisions. And the majority of them said it's a gut instinct. It's basically intuition.
Exactly. Now, all the great minds, you look at them, they'll say, like Einstein, Steve Jobs, you hear it. It's that's inner authority comes in, and we're not following the world, we're following that voice within us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, how would you define the origin of intuition? We know that it is this inner knowing. We know that, our gut will tell us, but where's it coming from? What do you say to that?
I think it's coming from what we call now the quantum field. It comes from this connection that we have to each other and to our source, where all of the information, like the Akashic record, it's all stored in the Akashic field. So we're starting to understand now that intuition isn't this, you have to wait for like an angel to whisper in your ear or anything like that. It's there. We're all connected to it. Men, women, animals, plants. We're all living in this sea of information and technology, a lot like, Irvin Laszlo. We'll get to that in a second, but he's someone who's really levitated this idea that finally fits, that explains what intuition is. And it really is our connection to our source.
It's all there,
All there.
everything that is, was, will be, and we have access to it.
Yeah, we do. I always say a part of you knows everything. Just remember that. Whatever you do, there, our conscious part, our intentional part has access to a little bit, but there's a part of us that knows everything that's happening everywhere and in all times. And that's the part we can tune into with our intuition.
Book number 9, Quantum Consciousness, Journey Through Other Realms by Peter Smith, published in 2015.
Yeah, again, I love Pete. He actually wrote the foreword to my latest book, The Illumination Code. And I love this book so much because he really very clearly gives a framework for how to interact with the quantum realms, the multidimensional realms, the psychic realms, whatever word you want to substitute. And for me, I think it's so important. Pete was the director of the Michael Newton Center for 20 years. So he comes from that background of, going through hypnosis and the life between lives work, and which is, that book was almost going to be on the list too, but it was so hard because when we realize that, our consciousness can get out of this reality and, we can still tap into these other realities. The book Quantum Consciousness is such a great breakdown of the difference between like past lives, interdimensional lives, parallel lives. What are these different ways and these different timelines that we all exist on? So great book. Really, really like allowed me to ground and plug in my intuition to the different ways that we could actually use it to discover, our greater being.
Yeah, I looked up this one and it said, because I hadn't read it before, it specially emphasizes four aspects of quantum consciousness: the creator effect, entanglement, everywhereness, love that word, and holographic healing, and also offers a detailed exploration of the various realms of consciousness, including stored consciousness, alternate consciousness, parallel consciousness, and interdimensional consciousness. Do you know anything about these various realms? Because, what is the difference between stored consciousness and alternate consciousness?
Oh, this is great. And we'll see if Pete listens to this, he can correct me if I'm wrong. but it's a really helpful thing to understand, and we don't realize that all of this boils down into quantum physics and our understanding of quantum physics. So with everyday consciousness, we store our consciousness locally in our personality, in our life, right? So if you look at the quantum field as this recording device, right, it's a memory storage, right? It records everything, and from the past, the future, it's all recorded there. But we have this local stored consciousness, which becomes our identity. But all of this stuff's also like backed up to the cloud, right? There's a great analogy with technology that we have today. And the cloud stuff's out there forever. But we do have a local consciousness, which we access through our own personal perspective. Then when you get universal consciousness, that's when you go beyond your personal ego and personality, and you can see things from the greater transcendent perspective. But then you have like alternate timelines, alternate realities. That's what this idea that when we talk about everything that's ever happened and will happen is happening in the eternal now. Well, what does it mean? How do we still have free will if that's the case? So that's obviously the first question. If really there's no such thing as time, and time is just an illusion of us sitting here in this present moment in our personal consciousness, how do we have free will to create? Are we just going through a track if everything's already happened? And so the answer is yes, we still have free will to create, but it comes out in alternate timelines. Every choice we make creates a new timeline, creates a new identity, creates a new you, right? So these alternate realities create different realities of Kim Chestney or Sandra Sedgbeer, all these different places creating different versions of you. So you can even tap into those parallel consciousnesses and those parallel realities and learn from these sort of other versions of yourself, as well as past versions of yourself, past lives, incarnations that have happened in the quote unquote past and the quote unquote on future, even though they're all really actually happening in the present moment. So it's a lot. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, but yes, yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah. You say that Peter is your favorite guide to exploring the universal realms. Why?
Just because he makes it so accessible. I think and he, he's done this for a long time in his life. So he's really good at helping people to tune in to that inner dimension in a safe way, in a way that you feel really supported and able to control your environment, right? Because one of the things people have to be careful of, is when you go out into the world and you're using your intuition and you're sort of like traveling or doing these sort of spiritual experiments. And if you're not careful, you could get yourself into trouble, which is, something that I actually personally experienced. So one of the things I love about Pete is everything is just so controlled. There's this container of safety, and he does things in a way that you can feel safe going out there and exploring all of these realms without putting yourself at risk or feeling like, unsafe or scared or anything like that.
Book number 10, Science and the Akashic Field, an Integral Theory of Everything by Dr. Ervin Laszlo, published in 2004. As you said earlier, you really admire his work.
Yeah, I think he really hits the ball home. I think I read when I discovered his work a few years ago. It's really what inspired my latest book, The Illumination Code. I really felt like I had hit the Holy Grail. Like, this is the book I had been looking for my entire life. It's like, where were you my whole life, Dr. Laszlo? And I had the opportunity to meet with him and talk with him on multiple occasions. So it was for me, a real culmination of everything I had been searching for. All the work I had been doing was explained by the theories that he brought forth with his theory of everything, the quantum akashic field, and that psychic ability was 100% possible in a quantum universe, which we now know that we live in. So the Illumination Code was sort of, it deepened that idea and focused it on specifically intuition as a quantum phenomenon that has been misunderstood as something occult and not real and something dangerous, when really it's just a part of our cognition system that we haven't fully figured out how to use because we didn't know we were living in a quantum universe until like 100 years ago. So every spiritual experience, every psychic experience, every intuitive experience can now be explained by principles in quantum physics. And this book, for me, just put all the pieces of the puzzle together. So can't recommend it highly enough.
Okay, so that's your 10 books. I have to ask you, of all the topics that you could have chosen to study, why intuition? I mean, some people would say, why do we need to be taught it? It's so innate, it's so natural. Why have you made your life's work about intuition?
Well, I think that's one of those, the answers are one of those statements. Well, I didn't choose intuition. I think intuition chose me. I would not have chosen this. I mean, I know I was born on Halloween and all this stuff, but I had to understand my world. Like, for me, the things that intuition brought into my world, I needed to understand what was going on. And so it really fueled this lifelong quest. And the reason why people need to develop it, and this is something that I hear a lot, because I teach intuition, and that's all, like, that's my lane. Everything I do is related to intuition. There's people that do all kinds of things. If you want intuition, I'm your girl. I have been studying it and passionate about it for as long as I can remember, like 40 years. So for me, teaching intuition is so important. People make the mistake of thinking that they understand their intuition because we do have natural intuition. We also have natural intellect where we can learn things, but we go to school to get smarter. We should train our minds to become more intuitive, and we can do that. And so that's one of the things I personally think that intuition is going to be a force in our future. It's going to be our saving grace. It's going to be the thing that differentiates us from the machines. It's the key to our humanity. It's the key to our unity. And it's the feminine way of knowing. It's not for men or women, but it's a simple act of opening up to receive and learning to understand those signals that we download from this field around us. And the really smart people, the genius people, have already figured this out. I'm telling you, the people that are out there at the top, these people realize they know it already. And I'm trying to get out there and shout it out from the rooftops. So more and more people realize that, it's not just a feeling that comes and goes, or, is something that, maybe it's, we can rely on it here or then. It's learnable, repeatable. But that doesn't take away from its magic, right? That's the thing about intuition. It is magical. It is this exciting thing that we can dive into and that can inform us and can expand our mind. So it's not learning the way we learn with, the other side of our brain, which is like facts and linear memorization and things like that. Intuition is about connecting and receiving and learning to understand the unique way that each of us receive those cues from the quantum field within us. So it is 100% important that we give our intuition time and attention, however we're called to do it, in a way that's more than just saying, oh, well, I'm intuitive, I'm good, because none of us are good. We all lose about this much of our brain with our intuition. Like, we have so much more potential, each and every one of us, if we really want to go out and, see where that leads.
Well, it is something that is innate. We all have access to it, and yet, our antecedents knew this. Life was conducted, in that manner, and we lost connection to it. Do
Yes.
you, looking at the world today, and how many people are afraid, in turmoil, anxious, angry, upset, feeling betrayed, all of those things and many, many more. Do you feel that there is a concerted effort to train people out of their intuition?
100%. There's no doubt, and not just today, this has been going on throughout history. If you really study the history of our relationship with intuition, it has been systematically oppressed by governments and religion from like the beginning of time, because it's power. Our intuition gives us power. It gives us our inner authority, and the powers that want to control us do not want us abiding by our inner authority. We just need to abide by authority. So there is an element of intuition that is radical, which is why I named my second book Radical Intuition, because it's a shift. It's a revolutionary shift to start living by your inner authority, because your inner authority is going to tell you different things than your social conditioning or your family or your friends or any of those other voices that are in your head. There's one true voice in your head, and that's your intuition. It connects you with truth. That's the thing about intuition. There's no, guessing. Intuition's never wrong. People are like, what happens when your intuition's wrong? Your intuition's never, ever wrong. If something didn't work out, either you're not seeing the good in it that your intuition wanted you to see, or our thinking mind made a mistake and misinterpreted what our intuition was saying. But intuition is, by definition, our connection to the fundamental truth of the universe. So the more we can listen to tap into that and start paying attention to those signals that it's giving us every day, the better our lives going to be, and the more we're going to have empathy for each other and connect to each other and have less of this divisiveness that's just rotting our society as we turn against each other and create these cultures of fear and anxiety. All of these are symptoms of detachment from ourselves, detachment from our intuition and our ability to trust who we really are.
You talk about intuition as the soul's power of knowing God. That's a beautiful reframe. When did that definition first come to you, and what did it shift in you?
Yeah, so that's an actual quote from Yogananda, and that was one of the first quotes that really touched my soul from him, is realizing that intuition isn't our connection to the occult or the paranormal or even our creativity or all these different things that people say intuition is. It's that and so much more. It is ultimately our connection to God, the universe, our source, our part of us that knows everything. And I would always joke, I've got the most important job in the world, because I teach people how to connect with the most important part of themselves, which is their intuition. And if they have that intuition clear and flowing, everything else in life starts to fall into place, because you're not living from fear. You're not living from this small place of unconsciousness or, unawareness. You've expanded your mind, right? That's what intuition calls us to do, is to expand our minds. We live in an expanding universe. Our intuition wants us to grow and expand and move into that higher awareness and grow with the universe, instead of just staying small and staying in this place of, separation or unconsciousness.
Your first book was literally predicted in a psychic circle. And it came true, and you didn't want to be a writer. What happened there?
Back to intuition chose me. I didn't choose intuition. So I was in these intuition development groups with, the Ralph Jordan's group here in Pittsburgh. And we would do small groups and we do partner exchanges during these groups. And there was one particular woman there who was so good. Everybody wanted to have Joanne as their partner because she was a medium, and she would just all of a sudden, your grandma's here, and she'd tell you these things. And so my grandma just passed, and she kept talking to me about my grandma, and it really, I mean, she knew things that nobody could know. Like, she was the real deal, right? She was just this regular old woman living here in Pittsburgh. She didn't have a business, but she was born with this gift. So I was really excited to have her that night, and I thought I was going to hear from my grandma, and she looks at me, and she's like, they're telling me you're going to be writing a book, so get ready to write a book. And I was pregnant with my daughter at the time. I had no intentions of writing a book, like no aspirations at all. And I was mad. I remember driving home. I remember, like, I had a Tahoe at the time, and I just remember in the darkness driving home. I was really bummed. I was like, man, like that wasn't what I wanted to hear. I'm not doing that. And long story short, within a year, I had this book deal, and it was incredible. And I could have never done that on my own. The universe just put that in my lap, and all started with an intuition development group. So that was a psychic workshop. So I actually wrote books about that intuition development group and how people could do that themselves. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. One of the themes that threads throughout your list is courage. The courage to trust the invisible, to challenge dogma, to create your own path. What do you say to people who still fear intuition, misunderstand it, misuse it?
Yeah, really great question. And I just had a conversation with a friend of mine about that yesterday, and she's like, "Oh, I think everyone gets intuition now. I don't think people are afraid of it like they used to." I'm like, as a teacher, I've taught thousands of students, and I said, I don't think that's true at all. I think there's a lot of people that still don't understand intuition. I think that's the key. We have people that have been taught to fear it, that it's something evil, right? And like, that's just Hollywood. That's just, there's just no basis for reality when you really start to understand intuition and what it is. So that's just it's fear mongering, and then there is really, I think, a part of reality that where people just aren't ready, I think, to tune into those subtle dimensions yet. I feel like it's coming. I really feel like we're making strides, and we're so much better off now than we were 30 years ago when I started reading about this stuff. That was a smaller contingent. There's more people that get it now. The rise of the feminine culture, feminine receptivity is helping to push this along as well. But there is resistance. There 100% is still resistance. And I think that hopefully it's just a matter of time for us to break through that. We just need more and more people out there vouching for it. That's really the key. We need people like Einstein and Steve Jobs and Yogananda and people who've done great things in the world and are respected to come out and say, this is something that we need to pay attention to, right? This isn't just a woo-woo thing or, tarot cards. This is something that is an extraordinary dimension of human being, of our minds, that was just sitting here untapped. And there's so much evidence out there now. There's scientific evidence abounds. There's so many places that have been dedicated to finding this and actually spreading the word. So isn't it time that we actually pay attention and say, what can we really do with this? What is the potential here? Why do we have it? And I think that the answer to that will lead us to some exciting new things in the future if things go well on this timeline.
What does your intuition tell you?
I hope so. I hope so. You can never tell. Things shift, but
yeah. You pioneered the Create Festival. How did that come about, and what was it about?
Yeah, so that was really applied intuition. I was working in technology here in Pittsburgh with the Tech Council, helping. We worked with all the big companies like Google, Facebook, all those guys, but also local people, small startups. And I did a series of studies on creativity and its role in creating new businesses and innovation and all that stuff. And all this that we realized was part of intuition. These are all ways that we apply intuition to the business world, to the cultural world. So it was really exciting. I got to work with some really great people during that time, and really got to witness firsthand. I'm sitting in meetings and I'm hearing people talk about intuition. People with PhDs, not people that are, in my intuition circles, strangers, talking about how important intuition is to really understand, to lead the way in leadership, right? Like, think about Apple as really it was this great example of, of intuition applied to business. Steve Jobs, the book he gave away to everybody was Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi, and really understood intuition as this thing that makes you different and unique. And when they operated under that sort of banner, you can see all of the innovation that made them this global force, because he listened to his intuition instead of following other people and doing what the pack was doing. So it's really key that we learn to follow ourselves and not the world.
Yeah, very true. You describe your 10 best list as the stepping stones of a 30-year inner journey. If you could go back in time and meet that 14-year-old self, and give them one other book than Shirley's, what book would you give to them?
I would give them my book. And I'm not just saying that to sell books, but I really wrote every book that I've written for that young self, for anybody who's out there going through what I did. These books were really therapeutic for me, because they're the things I needed to understand my reality. And, if you're out there and you've had intuitive experiences that you don't understand, you're the person that I wrote those books for. Because for me, I don't know, I'm thinking about my next book, but what book am I going to write now? Because this 10-year, 30-year journey, however long it's been, I finally feel like everything makes sense now. So I got those answers, and I'm at this place of completion and feeling like the world that I live in actually makes sense. So I would have loved to have read any of the books that I wrote when I was 14 years old and just saved me all the trouble.
So what is the Illumination Code about? How is it different from your previous books?
So the Illumination Code was really, that's the book where all the science falls into place. Radical Intuition was all about using intuition, understanding how it works, and developing it. Everyone can do it. Here's things you can do to develop your intuition. But the Illumination Code talks about how it works. Because after Radical Intuition, everyone's like, oh my gosh, this works, but how is this actually working? How am I getting these things? Where are they coming from? I know things before they're going to happen. How is that possible, right? So the Illumination Code really breaks down intuition as a quantum phenomenon and talks about all those key words like entanglement, multidimensional realities, all of the different ways that you see quantum physics interacting with the human psyche. Really is outlined in the Illumination Code, understanding that we have this invisible code of energy that's ubiquitous outside of us, inside of us, that's constantly informing us and guiding us. We just need to learn how to tune into that. So we have this inbuilt navigation system, and we can start using it with clarity and confidence, instead of, every once in a while we'll get a hit here or there, but it moves us out of this state of unconscious confusion and into this state of flow and awareness and being aligned with the unfolding of our lives.
You mentioned Steve Jobs and the fact that he gave everybody at his memorial service a copy of Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. What book, other than your own and other than Shirley MacLaine's Out on a Limb, would you want to give people who attend your memorial service?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't give them one of my own books. I think, for the people who are missing me, I would give C.S. Lewis' book, A Grief Observed. I lost my sister tragically when I was younger, and the immensity of that pain really, he really captured what attachment is, and what the soul connection is, and how to move through that and find healing in it. So I would definitely recommend that for anyone who's ever suffering loss or missing someone who's gone into the spiritual realm, even though they're still there. And I think if I had to give out another book to everyone, probably would be a Yogananda book. I do like his new book, the Second Coming of Christ. Not new book, but it was later book, Second Coming of Christ. And the principle of that book is that the second coming of Christ is within us, and it's your intuition. And it's speaking to us from within. So the Christ consciousness is coming from within and speaking to us intuitively. So I think that's a powerful statement that, again, unites the East and West and shows us how our inner voice can be interpreted and used, really from all these different facets, whether it's spiritual, scientific, religious. Truth is singular, and these are all different ways of just receiving the same core truth.
Yeah, was there a particular phrase that C.S. Lewis said? I mean, I heard somebody once say that grief is love with nowhere to land. And I thought that was a beautiful way of looking at grief. Is there a particular phrase that you've read or heard about grief that, really hit home for you, summed it up?
Yeah, and I do think that part of that notion was conveyed in the book of Grief Observed. But I think what really stood out to me, the phrase from that book that really stood out, was that all of you can't have just the joy without the pain. And he even looked at it as this sort of timeless experience, and that the pain is the price of all the joy that came before it. Instead of looking at it linear, like you knew that this was something that's going to happen when you have the separation, but that's the price you paid for all those moments of love and all of that connectedness. So for me, it really helped me to look at the holistic experience of love with someone and not just look at the final loss.
Kim Chestney, thank you so much for adding your 10 best list of spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Thanks for having me. This has been such a fun conversation. I love the exercise, and thanks for all the insights that it led me to reviewing it.
Thank you. So before we close, reflecting over Kim's list, here's something to consider. Maybe you're not here to figure life out. Maybe you're here to tune in, follow the weird little nudges, and trust that the part of you that knows things for no good reason actually does. Maybe the real intelligence isn't the voice in your head, but the signal beneath it. And maybe, just maybe, the books that truly change your life aren't the ones that tell you what's true, but the ones that remind you of what you already knew. For more information about Kim Chestney's books, cards, classes, courses, events, and more, visit her two websites at kimchestney.com and intuition-lab.com. And if today's conversation sparked your curiosity, you'll love our other two shows, the Synergy Sessions, where leading edge thinkers come together in bold, unscripted dialogues that ignite new possibilities, and Between Realms and Reason, where we journey into the mysteries of consciousness and energy, the hidden layers of reality, and science converges with spirit in ways you've never imagined. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Kim Chestney.
Thank you.